Hi, Mark Webster at Blue on Blue Recording Studio. Just wanted to go over how to get this look of a musician against a black background. For example, as shown in this video here. The technique is pretty straightforward. However, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. So we'll go over how to do it and then also go over a few common problems and how to fix them. So here's our setup. We have our wonderful talent, the girl with the purple hair in the middle here. We've got a black background on the back, and then we have a single light overhead. Okay, so how do we make this work? Basic idea is we've got our musician with a bright light on them, and then we have our backdrop with ideally no light shining on it. And that's actually what makes it work, the fact that there's no light shining on the backdrop. Sometimes there's a misconception that it's the color of the backdrop, black or whatever, that's making it look that way. And certainly having black color helps. But what really makes the effect have that deep black look to it is the fact that there's no light reflecting off of the backdrop, reflecting back into the camera. And when the camera doesn't see any light reflecting off of something, it treats it as black. So everything we're going to be doing is techniques to try to minimize the amount of light that spills onto this backdrop. Okay, so let's talk about the backdrop. There's nothing particularly special about the backdrop. Almost anything will work. It could be a wall that is a dark color. It could be a bed sheet. Doesn't have to be black. It could be dark blue, dark gray. Obviously, the darker it is, the easier it is to work with. So if you have black, that's great, but it doesn't have to be black even. The main thing is we just got to keep the light off of it. So one technique here, you can see that we've actually got a fair amount of space between the backdrop and the musician. In fact, actually, if I measure it here, we've got about 6 or 7 feet here. And the reason we do that is that if we've got our light on our musician, it's a lot easier to make sure that the light's not spilling onto the backdrop if we've got the light 6 or 7 feet away. If you have the light a lot closer, some of that light's going to start spilling on the backdrop, and now we have more light reflecting off the backdrop and back into the camera. So one key thing is make sure that you're standing far enough away. So this here is a dedicated light. It just has a few features that makes it a little bit easier to do this, but you can do this with any light. There's no special light is needed. Most important thing is actually to make sure that this is the only light. So you don't want to have any other lights out in your room that will be shining light on your backdrop. You don't want to have light coming in the windows or anything like that. So turn off all the lights, close up all the windows, do it at night if you need to. And that's one of the most important things you can do. Then have your one light and put your one light above your talent. And then what you're going to do here is notice that the back side of this is dark and all the light's only coming off of one side. Again, that's so that the light only shines on the musician and not on the rest of the room. So if you're using a light like a spotlight, that's a great place to start. If the spotlight maybe shoots some light out the back or something like that, you can just take some ordinary foil and just kind of wrap the back a little bit so to keep the light from shooting out the back. If you're using something more like a table lamp, well, maybe you need to put like a little piece of cardboard around it or something like that, just to kind of make sure that the light only goes in one direction and doesn't light up the rest of the room and light up your backdrop. The second thing is notice that we're actually shining the light, we're pointing the light downward. Again, that's so that the light will focus down on the floor as opposed to shining on the backdrop. Again, because the whole point is to keep the light off the backdrop. I wanted to include a photo here from a musician who's currently doing one of these videos, just to show what the typical setup might look like in a house or apartment. You can see here they've got a bed sheet they're using for the backdrop. They're interesting here. They're also using the backdrop on the floor as well to cut down on the reflections from the floor. Real good idea there. You can see for their light, they're using a floor lamp, one of those lights off the floor lamp, and they've put some foil around it to keep the light from spilling off the back. And then they've got a tripod, which is great. If you've got a tripod, that's the simplest solution, but if you don't, not a problem. You can use anything that's steady and can just hold your camera still. So if you put that all together, you should get a shot that looks something like this. Now let's talk about things that can go wrong. All right, the most common thing that goes wrong is that the musician is just standing too close to the backdrop. So like I'm standing here maybe about a foot in front of the backdrop, Problem is that the light now is also just about a foot or two in front of the backdrop. And that means that all kinds of light is spilling onto the backdrop and then reflecting off the backdrop into the camera. And so that's why the backdrop doesn't look black. So what you want to do is just move yourself away like several feet, 5, 6, 7 feet, 8 feet if you can, away from the backdrop, and move the light along with you. And then you'll get the light off of the backdrop, and then that should solve the problem. A second problem is kind of related. That's if you have the light actually shining much more like directly at your face, in which case the light is literally shining right on the backdrop as well. So another thing to check if you're getting a lot of light on your backdrop is, can you actually just put the light up a little higher so it's tilting downward, and most of the light then is going down onto the floor as opposed to onto your backdrop. Finally, the last area where you can sometimes have some trouble is on the camera itself. What will sometimes happen is the camera, if it has an automatic setting, it'll try to automatically expose for the background as opposed to for the person in front of it. And then what happens is that it will end up overexposing the person, and the background will end up showing all kinds of gray detail and things like that that you don't want to see. So if you're using something like a mobile phone camera, usually you can just tap on the face that you want to be focusing on. That'll make sure that it does focus on the face. It should properly expose for the face, and then the background will go black. If you're using a camera like a DSLR or something like, or a mirrorless camera or something like that, the easiest thing to do is just to put it into manual rather than an automatic, and then you don't have to worry about it trying to expose for the wrong thing, trying to expose in the background. That way you can actually properly expose it for the person, and the background will be guaranteed to be black. So, there you go. Hope that helps. Happy filming!